Good afternoon, and welcome to the next edition of EP's Extraordinary series. The aim of this series is to connect top global leaders with emerging talent, building a bridge between today's operators and tomorrow's leaders. By sharing insights, knowledge, and ideas and support, we're creating a platform that nurtures talent and fosters meaningful exchange between the C-suite and the next generation. So our guest today is someone who embodies that spirit. Simon Halliday's career has spanned international rugby, corporate finance, and entrepreneurial leadership. He's represented England on the rugby field, navigated the highs and lows of the financial sector with Lehman Brothers, and today leads a unique business, the Sporting Wine Club, combining his love of sport, connection, and storytelling through wine. It's a fascinating journey, and today we are asking what defines the man behind those very different roles, and what can his story teach us about resilience, identity, and reinvention? Simon will begin with some reflections on his journey, and then we will move into a Q&A. So Simon, over to you.
Well, thank you, Helena, and flattering to be called a top global leader, which I'm anything but. But I'm firstly delighted to be here today, and also like to thank EP for all the great work that they do in bringing key matters to the forefront, and not just in the hospitality industry, but many other ways too. And I guess my what I hope to bring today is just a few reflections on my roller coaster of a journey, some of the influences that I've been fortunate to sort of be under, but also to look at some of those opportunities and how they came about. And as Helena announced, I eventually, after many years of trying, got to play for England on the rugby field when the game was amateur, and I retired when it was just on the verge of going professional. That felt like professional, as to be said. And a very varied career in investment banking, which was a bit of a fluke to begin with, as I'll come on to, and then even more of a moment of serendipity, or whatever you want to call it, ended up in the wine industry. I've always been a consumer of good wine, obviously when not training, but it's now become something I do more and more together with other things. So I guess what I want to try and leave with people is the sense of, if you are sitting there daring to dream, thinking about opportunities and wanting to make the most of your life, perhaps you're stuck in a situation you're not too happy with. It could be anything, or you're just on the beginning of a journey, or indeed you've had a journey and you're wondering what to do next. And I guess I've been through all of that. And so what I reflect back on is that there are moments in time which make a difference somehow. And you make your own luck, but you do need to be lucky. I think if there's one thing that most people will reflect on, is that they've had good fortune. And you can't make that happen, but you can create environments where it's more likely to happen to you than not. And I think, first of all, having the ambition, but not necessarily prescribing what you're going to do. I remember when people asked me, did you always think you were going to play rugby for England? I mean, all kids dream about their boyhood heroes, whether it be football, rugby, or any other sport for that matter. In the same way that my dad was a pilot in the Fleet Air Arm, and I thought, well, I want to be one of those, until I failed my physics O level, and then I knew I couldn't. But I only said it because my dad was doing that. So, and in reality, did I really want to be? So, you can dare to dream as a kid, and why not? But as I progressed through my teenage years, I was studying classics and modern languages because I was good at them. It wasn't because I had an ambition to be a classicist or an archaeologist or anything. So when I went up to Oxford and studied French and Latin, it was slightly weird that that was the course that required many, many hours in the library. But I was also then playing a lot of sport. And so how do you make that challenge work? Well, you don't actually. You go with what your gut instinct tells you. You try and do your best at everything. And so there's no point mapping out that you're going to try to be something. Make sure that you just fulfill your own potential in what you're good at, and then acknowledge your weaknesses as well. I think that will come through as something that you genuinely have to do, because you get stronger, weirdly, through understanding your weaknesses and then working on them. And so when a a very large South African back row forward took me to one side when I was age 20 and said, do you realize that you could actually mix it at the top of rugby? I've seen you play against top internationals. I was a university student with no money, just doing my best and having a good time. And it was he who actually got me to stop, think about myself. I'm sure everyone's got that moment where somebody influenced you, and that was that person. So I had a choice. I could either ignore what he said or I could take it seriously. It didn't change my life. It just got me thinking differently. So I think as I went through the university period and then out the other side and started playing for Bath, got 3 varsity match blues, pretty unsuccessful actually. I played pretty poorly in every single match. And that's a shame because it's Twickenham and you don't want to play badly at Twickenham. I was fortunate that I never lost at Twickenham in my international career other than the World Cup final. Pretty big one to lose, mind you. Uh, but I'm proud of that. And you develop what you're good at and you try and make sure that you fulfill on those criteria. So as I became um, a pretty good rugby player on the edge of the England squad, I realized I had to earn some money because you couldn't get student loans. You couldn't, there were no credit cards in those days. If you had no money, you had no money. You sign on or you just go without. It really was as simple as that. Some of my best clothes I still remember from the local charity shop because it only cost me 2 bob or 50p. And that's the case. 'Cause no one knew anything
Yeah.
different. And then suddenly I get catapulted into the England squad. And when I made my initial debut, having toured 2 or 3 times around the world, courtesy of people giving me 50 quid or letting me go, you know, and they were pretty special times. I thought everything was in front of me. I've been given a job in stockbroking and get that as a French and Latin student, become a stockbroker. Why? Because I had a really great conversation with someone, not because he said, are you good at maths or statistics? I think he felt that he could help me turn into something. And then the following week, when I played my first game for England, the following week I had a massive ankle injury and ended up in hospital. And I lost my job and had to leave town and go and work in Bath um, uh, because someone had given me something to do. And the team manager gave me a house to live or went to live with his family whilst I was having all the rehab and everything. So I went from England Rugby International, sky's the limit, everything going for me to literally nothing. And it's
Mm.
moments like that where you really understand who you are. You got to go back to some of your old values and rely on people and not give up. So it'll come. The disappointment will come. Whatever. In my sense, it was pretty traumatic, but something will happen that really hits you, and you've got to find a way to just deal with it. Not forget it because it defines you, and it's certainly those months of rehab defined me as a person. I never thought I'd get back. I never thought I'd get the chance again. And I needed a lot of people to support me. So you do need help from people. You can't do it all on your own. And I bounced back to play many years for England and became an investment banker in the city. Again, with classics modern language in the background, I didn't really see that as natural, but I got on really well with the people. I was part of a team. You can be very individual in today's world. It's possible to be very individual in tech and AI, for example, or other areas which allow you to be just specialist. And technology has been a big shift in that. Wasn't really there when I was that age. But teamwork was really important. And I remember I was at UBS for 7 years. I had 3 decades investment banking in the end. And I was called in by my two bosses. It was the year after the World Cup because I was playing and working. It what felt like a fully professional rugby career alongside working. And I thought perhaps they've just had enough of me. And they called me into the room and I was pretty nervous. I thought perhaps, thank you, Simon, we like you, but there's the door. And they said, how do we get all these high flying people? Don't look so nervous to begin with. Don't.
Mm.
I said, well, I kind of feel I've been called into a room by my two bosses. Feels pretty big. No, what we want to talk to you about is how did your England team have so much success with all those people from everywhere? Because we've got on that market floor all this talent, that really works well individually, but they don't come together and we don't make the most of who we are. How did you do that in your rugby world? And I thought, wow, they're not going to fire me. So I was kind of very relieved. There was a lot of verbal diary later. I kind of said to them, those understanding different people, being tolerant of people, don't prejudge people, uh, try hard to work with them, you know, be forthright, but don't seek confrontation, and let's see what we can do together. And we ended up going on a big offsite. And of course, as a rugby player, get everyone in a bar, that will work out. We all know that's the answer to everything. Obviously not, but we got everyone out of the work environment into a more relaxed opportunity to share views and get to know each other better. And I feel absolutely certain that that made a big impact. And I felt then that the first sign of material, that cross-referencing of sport and all the values of sport into business and how you make yourselves better, taking those virtues. And it's not all plain sailing, obviously, because, recounting my injury, going bankrupt with Lehman Brothers, that was a serious moment in my life where I lost an awful lot, including my job, as did thousands of other people. And, it was a financial crisis and, it wasn't my fault. My mum keeps saying that her bridge partners blame me for losing their pension. I said, promise you it wasn't my fault. But, so that was a really a cataclysmic time, and everyone now studies the financial crisis and what happened and why. And I guess that eventually called time on my career because I'd stayed on with Nomura, which was a bit of a culture shock because Japanese bank taking over European/US business was that really pressured us and created a lot of challenges for the culture. I eventually stopped and then I come to the entrepreneurial side of my life, I suppose. Although I'd always like to think I was quite entrepreneurial in spirit. And on a British Lions tour, obviously they've gone to Australia this year, are there now. There's a special things. I unfortunately was injured for the tour I could have gone on. But I was following the Lions in South Africa and I met Scott Berger, who I would have played against many years ago. Pretty glad I didn't. The size of his hands and his feet, because in those days they kind of trampled on you and then shook your hands afterwards. Um, and he was in the wine industry, and I persuaded him to send some wine to England, and the company he supplied went bust. Very embarrassing, and I formed a company to pay him back. That's how Sporting Wine emerged. And I thought, well, people will think it's a gimmick. They'll think I don't know anything about wine, which is true. So I said, right, all the wine has to be made on the estate, made and bottled on the estate, so it's real. I can see the vineyard, and everyone knows that's where the grapes come from. And secondly, there has to be an authentic sporting connection. That's how we built the business. And that was, gosh, I mean, it's been 7 or 8 years now, and it's a bit of labor and love, but it brings together all those things that I care about, which is, the sport and business and wine and charity. I think all sports people, anyone actually, knows that they're fortunate. There can be one bad injury and then you never play again. The things can go wrong for you. You can get ill, and sadly, motor neuron disease, which my great friend Donny Weir died from a while back. We made a wine for him to fight to give currency. So we were using the world of sport and wine and charity to advertise the plight of somebody. And I think uh, that really fits really neatly through the narrative of who I am, really, because I was so um, uh, influenced and received so much benefit when life was bad for me and so much help. And so it kind of sits within your psyche. And all those things, I think, kind of make up who you are. And I think for anybody, if I could summarize that you understand or should always have a dream that you want to achieve something. Don't prescribe it. You can't. And I remember recruiting somebody into the investment bank I was working with at the time, DLJ, and he apologized for his CV because he said, "Oh, I studied French, Latin, and history, and I'm a senior managing director of this company, having studied classics modern languages." And because I didn't tell him, I said, "Why is that a bad thing?" Well, it's not maths, it's not statistic, it's not. I said, well, it doesn't need to be. You just need to have something in you that we see that we can help you with, and we see as talent, and we'll teach you the bits and pieces. You just need to have the ambition and the energy for it. I studied classics, modern languages, and he looked at me slightly embarrassed. I said, it just doesn't matter. We want to see something in you. And I think, therefore, don't think you have to be in a box to be able to do something. And then be prepared to accept that it won't always go your way, and understand that people will help you. Be vulnerable, bounce back. You can bounce back. And always have the ambition. I think the last thing is really, certainly the best sports people in the world have got a huge amount of humility because they know all these other things. They've been through the mill. They've got it wrong. There's nothing wrong with getting it wrong. In fact, you have to. You have to make mistakes and then work on how you do it better next time. But the humility of knowing that you're lucky to be at the top comes back to the luck. You need luck, but you make your own luck. And then you'll get to where your best talent can point you. But always know that you're grounded so that nothing's ever going to be terminal for you. You'll be able to bounce back from these things. And being in the wine industry is rather different from being in the investment banking industry, I can tell you. But the fun you get and the relationships that you have and the memories that you make are what life is all about. So I think, I'm sure, I'm just into another chapter. Who knows what's going to happen? But I've been fortunate that some of those strands for me have all come together and been helpful to me, and means that I can actually have a discussion like this and just sort of share some of those moments where you've been to right to the top, you've suffered, you've been right at the bottom in sport and in business, but you come out the other side as long as you went in with the right kind of understanding. So I probably ought to just sort of stop there and I've paraphrased the very long, rambling life that I've had so far, but there's still a lot to go, I hope. So yeah, there we are.
Yeah. No, thanks, Simon. What an overview. And I think it's safe to say it's quite a unique three careers. And I think we externally could be forgiven in thinking this was part of some grand plan. But do you think you could have done each separate career without the one before almost? I mean, do you think they've shaped each other as you went along?
Well, that's a fascinating point because I often get asked, would you have wanted to play rugby in the professional era? And I say no. And it's not because I was lucky enough to work in an industry that paid me well, because it did. Banking world definitely does if you put the hours in. And it's that for me, sport is a passion, and I never wanted it to be a business for me. I mean, I played a lot of cricket as well as rugby, and the ability to say no, I was just where you can't go to that christening or that wedding, or you can't take that holiday because you've got to do this. And I often through my career made choices along that front. And I took risks with whether I might or might not be selected again for my country, for example, because I made decisions that were non-rugby decisions. And I've always wanted to be able to say yes or no. And therefore I will, um, the priority of your health and your family, and the work and the sport, you've got to keep your priorities right. And that means that sometimes you've got to go with the slings and the arrows. But at the end of it, as long as your priorities are there, then you'll make the right decisions. But and again, that comes back to being prepared for disappointment. That you make a decision, and I talked about the Lions. I withdrew from the Lions tour in '89 because I had a grumbling ankle. I could have played, but I was going to have to go away for 2.5 months during a period where I was a parent of young children and also working most weeks of the year where you didn't really get much. So you you never got any much time off, and so I had to make decisions and choices. And people say, "What are you sure that isn't that something that you really wish you would have done?" And I go, yeah, of course, but what was I supposed to do? You can just follow that very sort of self-centered sort of view. So you are making choices all the time. But again, things could have gone for me in a different direction. But there's no point looking back either. That's the other thing. There's no remorse involved. That just happened. You move on.
Yeah. And related to that, we've got a question in the chat. Was there anything that you had to unlearn in order to succeed in each field?
You're always having to change the way, you've never done it. You're always learning, and you've got to change what you do. Everything which is new, whether it be, I mean, I in the sporting world, I made the cardinal sin of moving from Bath rugby that was winning everything you could imagine to London to play for the Harlequins. People still spit when they kind of hear that. I was literally said, I can't believe you're leaving.
Mm.
And I walked into a completely different culture. And I had to work out what that was and work out what my relationship was going to be with my ex-Bath colleagues and the people that I used to, live alongside and all the rest, because it really was a big thing. Didn't It wasn't the wrong call. And so I suppose in the sporting world, you you work out what, post my injury, I became a different person. I had to be. I was flying high and I thought I was invincible and get picked for England and everything's great and you get to stay in the Hilton Hotel and they pay your bill. My word, they pay your bill for you. How amazing that was. So on the 23rd floor eating egg and bacon, looking over Hyde Park, thinking, well, get any better. And then suddenly I'm lying in a hospital bed thinking it doesn't get any worse.
Yeah.
And when you talk about unlearning, you just got to go back to the beginning. You can't go, oh, what if? Because then you're constantly, it's like self-pity. You can't allow self-pity to come in because you've got to start all over again. And you're starting all over again often. I never actually physically moved from one bank to the next I moved from Bath to London, and then there were three merger acquisitions from UBS to DLJ to Lehman Brothers to Nomura. I didn't actually actively leave any of them. It just happened. Takeovers and horrible redundancies that I had to administer because I was told to. Not because people weren't good enough, but because there were too many people in the new business. Horrible, and you learn so much from that, and you change your attitude so much that, and then because every time there's a takeover, there's casualties. And then obviously I went through the Lehman thing, which was the
Mm.
most traumatic amount you could imagine.
Unprecedented.
And what that did to people's lives, careers, and changed some people's outlooks forever.
So is it fair to say that in some ways life sort of happened to you almost, and it was you reacting to those events that were taking place and sort of changing your mindset? Was there any particular sort of mantra at the time that you'd tell yourself sort of when the kicks happened, I suppose, off and on field?
Well, I think you become, it's not so much accepting of things, but you just understand that sometimes the good stuff can't happen forever. You become very resilient. There's a word that's used a lot, and sometimes misused. Resilience isn't some form of strength. It's a state of mind that you have when things go wrong for you. And everyone has to deal with it differently. And there's nothing wrong with showing some emotion. I remember in some of the redundancy moments I talk about, there were tears flowing. They genuinely were. And I think it doesn't make me weak. I was a manager and I was really struggling with having to tell people they couldn't work with us anymore. It was horrible. And these were friends of mine, so you don't, but I was still, I knew I had to do it. So I was tough, but you can still show emotion. So I think it's things do happen to you and that other people's actions can influence, but the key is not to necessarily derive a bitterness out of that, because it's possible that you do, and it's someone else's fault. Okay, yeah, it
Mm.
is, but so what? That's life. It happens. if that person hadn't pushed me over at that point, or had that person not made that decision in that business transaction, then perhaps things would have been different. But hindsight's a wonderful thing. So you've got to be, that's not to say I'm inured or immune to having feelings of anger. I was very upset on a number of occasions, but you can't let it linger. You've got to store it and use it. Use the hurt to make it better next time.
Yeah, I think it's really good advice. Sort of turning a negative into into a positive almost. And I was quite interested to hear what you were saying about team. So and how you were approached to build teams when you moved to sort of investment banking and building a culture almost. What would be sort of your advice? Because we know more than ever now, culture and that sort of values is really important to sort of people coming into careers now. What's your advice on building strong teams and that sort of culture that people can get behind?
I think it's easy these days in a culture where I remember when the pandemic hit and we were all on these types of calls. And my reaction was, I mean, there was one slightly, other than that, those crazy pictures you'd see of people moving around behind you, and everyone was having to work out what their screenshot was going to look like. And there was a lot of kind of humor around that, which I thought was great. Um, I welcomed it in a funny sort of way because I was chairing European rugby at the time, and I was forever saying to the French in particular, "Can you make this meeting?" Oh, no, monsieur, I'm somewhere else. But of course, in the pandemic, I said, "I know where you are." It's a question of whether you sign into the call or whether you don't. So because I was lucky, or one of the lucky ones, because I knew everyone so well that being on those calls was fine for me. Um, but I felt sorry for people who sometimes hadn't met their boss for 9 months, or they couldn't generate relationship and build team. And the teams calls, right? And but it's not really. You don't really understand who someone is across the other side of a screen. And so I think this generation can sometimes say this generation, but in this world of working from home, or where technology is taken over to a degree, and we didn't have that. If I had a meeting and I was 15 minutes late, the person left. I couldn't send them a quick text going, "I'm late," or
Yeah,
I'll send you an email. It didn't exist. So it required you to be more respectful of people, and and in the sporting environment, um, yes, the individual scores the goal or the try or makes the 100, but they can't do it on their own. They can't. And I think all those individuals will, when they're asked, or at least most of them will say, it was the team.
yeah,
They're humble. They are. I mentioned that again. The humility of,
yeah,
yeah, I scored the runs, but it could have been, or I scored those tries, but someone had to give me the ball. The forwards had to go get the ball. Oh, they were awesome. And you hear that a lot. And it is true. And I think you're interdependent, you rely on other people. And I think it doesn't mean individualism doesn't count, because it does, and I managed the sales desk at UBS, at Lehman, at DLJ, where people were printing millions of pounds of business. And I wanted them to go and do more and more and more. But I wanted them also to accept that just because they were the one printing the business, it didn't mean that there wasn't a team of people, a squad behind them, that one were helping them do it, needed acknowledging internally and externally. So we had this 360. I remember mentioning at one of your previous events, actually. We created one of the first banks to create a 360, where we said to people, if you help your team uh, generate better return, then and you help other divisions come in and create more money and return and rankings and whatever, we'll get you paid. And they said, you never will. I need the money next to my name. No, no, we'll get you paid. And I think it then became a management structure thing to say, if that person brings all the best units in together and helps deliver, we'll make sure that you get rewarded for that. And that's a management culture thing. Because if
mm,
the you let the employee down on that, and they do all they're expected to do, and then, oh, sorry, I've had a tough year, we're not going to pay you, you've lost trust forever. And that
mm,
person will probably leave. And you'll never turn them, because they'll look you in the eye and go, you promised me that if I put out myself out for other people, got a result, then you'd compensate me for that. And you have let me down. I think that's the worst thing you can do.
Yeah,
Make someone a promise that if they bring in a better group result, that you'll reward them and then not to. I think
yeah.
that is the worst. And
So it's trust, really, isn't it? Trust
it is
and
trust
feeling
between
valued
you.
and heard. Mm,
Yeah, and on the sport field when you're going through a hard time, trusting the people around you that we're not going to let each other down. It's in the sport world, but then trusting all of those groups that we're all in it together, and we're going to. So I think teamship is, again, it's an abused term, teamwork and teamship, and what it means, it's hard. It's hard
yeah,
because you've got to acknowledge other people's inputs and other people's characters. They might be a bit spiky. They might be very, very quiet and unassuming, but very good at what they do. And you have to get all of those people
yeah,
into the mix and make sure that the unassuming one is regarded correctly by the other. It's not just he or she who shouts loudest, because often they're not the ones who they're performing. So you hear them, they're the ones that write you all the emails. Oh, I better get them paid. And then the person
yeah.
who's actually done the work and hasn't shouted from the rooftops doesn't get the kudos or the reward. So team is also about the leaders bringing all those different components of the team
Yeah.
along with them and making
And
sure.
valuing the individual within the team as well.
Yes.
Yeah, yeah. We've got another question here for you. So you've succeeded across very different fields at a very high level, something that seems increasingly rare in today's world of early specialization. Do you think the landscape has really changed, or are younger people simply adapting differently to the world that they're in?
I think it's a bit of both. I think it's a very good question because being a generalist before, if you like to call it that, was much more acceptable. And I'm not unaware that I'm going to live through the period and work through the period of the internet. And wow, the number of companies that were like shooting stars came across and were the next best thing and then went bust. And so been through that period, and obviously then you've had the rise of the Bitcoin, and you've technology as a real super sector. Windows were things I opened and mice I trod on, and but the mouse and the window became an important part of our life, and that was my world of bringing technology in. I used to say to people, you will go across the other side of the room and talk to that person. You will not write them an email. And now it's you've got to. You will
Yeah,
write an email and don't forget the CC button. It's these are the things you start talking about. So I think the world has changed. There is easier to specialize and do really well specializing. I mean, you always could. You can become a lawyer, banker. So, I mean, obviously, there's always been specializations, chemical engineering, but there's just more opportunity with that now. But I don't think, even if you have that, it may go wrong for you in your specialization, and you've got to look outwards and not just be, you could be the hospitality manager, you could be in this environment, you could be the chef, you could be, or I'm not saying the chef suddenly can become, or someone can become a chef all of a sudden, but we've all tried, haven't we? But don't get caught up in your specialization and don't think that you don't need other skill sets, because life doesn't work the way you want it to, and so you have to be adaptable and flexible. I don't think that will ever change, but yes, the questioner is right that there's more opportunity to dive more deeply into certain things now which have their own life, and AI is the most recent example.
yeah. And what would be your advice to someone who wanted to sort of, were feeling a bit, I suppose, reluctant to sort of make the change, shift, their career? What would be sort of your advice to them?
I think you've got to be vulnerable to being persuaded to do things. Go talk to people. There is no substitute to that. And I think as a sports person, and as someone who was possibly sort of opened my mouth too much on occasions and regretted it, but you've got to be approachable. If you and you can give off that sort of leave me alone, I'm fine bit. You can, and then no one will ask you, you okay? How you doing? I think you need to share, and there's nothing wrong with being a bit vulnerable. It's not weakness to say, oh, I'm not sure about this, or it's natural, and so I would encourage people to think openly. And there are people I've shared things with I wished I hadn't, of course, because you make a judgment call on whether you can trust somebody or not. But I think that's the only way. You can't just go off and do a night course on something else and switch. Well, you can, but um, you need guidance. People are there to help. Your manager, you can should be able to trust. We had HR in my day. HR was quite specialized in those days for employment related issues and other such things. And obviously, it's much broader now. The head of people, and I get all that because that's important. But also the work colleague around you who sees your stress and your pressure, or the person who works somewhere else who you meet in a bar and talk to them. And there is no substitute for that. I think it doesn't show that you're flaky or uncommitted. It just means that you're open-minded. And I
Yeah.
think you've got to be that because you never know what's going to happen.
And I think that leads quite nicely onto sort of the third part of your career, the sort of more entrepreneurial side. I mean, how did that come about? You'd gone from sort of working within teams, big, corporations. Was it lonely setting up your own business? Was it a personal sort of ambition,
Well,
or was it identifying a need?
it's been yeah, I mean, let's put something in context that obviously I've been a consumer of hospitality, and I've in my context as chairman of European Rugby, and obviously in banking world, when you entertain people, you take to great venues, you expect an experience and you want to say thank you and come back, and you want that venue to be a place where you can talk work if you want to. I used to invite people to Twickenham when after I'd stopped playing. I was on the committees, and people would come to the car park. I remember the corporate relationship was invited to a plush venue at the top of the stadium, all the best food and wine, and she preferred to come to the car park where we had a sort of bit of a picnic out of the back of a car with some wine and a plastic, whatever, because of the atmosphere of the people. And the experience matters. And I've been around stadia and venues and hospitality areas all around Europe for a number of years. And I kept looking at the quality of the wine and going, why are they compromising? Why can
Mm.
we not do something nice instead of being pushing it away and having to have a beer, or something different, And so when I got into the wine industry, which was by mistake, as I described, with Skullberger having sent a load of wine to England, wasn't being paid for because the company supply went bust. And I said, I will form a company to pay you back. That's kind of how it all happened. And then I had those two selling points. I then embarked on that very lonely ride of, I don't care who you are, you can be my best friend. If I've ordered a case of wine, it doesn't turn up on time, you're in trouble. And secondly, there might be a broken bottle. And thirdly, you've left it under the bush and it's been stolen. Fourthly, it's corked, or, fifthly, I'm sure it doesn't cost that much. You've overcharged me. I mean, and I got into this world of the customer giving me a hard time all the time. And of course, that's not where I was used to, because I'd worked in I worked in private client stockbroking for a while, but that was a real wake up call. And then of course you work out and people who understand, all of the people on this call who will listen to, the world of margins in catering services and food and drink and all the rest. It's a very different world to where I came from. Everyone wanted a piece of the margin. I'm going, well, hold on a second. So I regard myself as a disruptor with a story. So I was going into the chair people at a stadium or big corporate services, whatever, and go, here's my story. I've got these wines which have got a sporting connection and they're made on the estate, and this narrative, and this guy played for, Argentina, this guy and this woman was the England hockey captain, or whatever happens to be, or we celebrate International Women's Day. So we've got six really top female winemakers, and we really celebrate that. So um, you're appealing to kind of different people, but it's hard work because it's a consumer business. And as I said, it encompasses a lot of the values that I kind of that come with. But at the end of it, I used to feel personally responsible for the quality of the wine. And I used to get defensive when people didn't like it. And I said, well, why am I being defensive? I didn't make it. You know, it's a living organism. It can go off. It can. It's like milk. It can go off. No one expects it to be corked. Okay, but it may be. That's all right. Try the next one. That's cool too. All right. Well, let's do another case then, or whatever. But so you learn. I've learned a huge amount about customer satisfaction. I'm a passionate believer for anyone who listens into this that you got to make the experience of where you're going a good one, and that's food as well as drink. And I think some of the people who are gaining contracts in the sporting world, certainly, and even the business world too, are realizing they can't just turf out any old food. There's got to be something really attractive to it. And if I can introduce a wine alongside it or a spirits alongside it that's got a sporting connection, that's got a charitable connection, that comes from a vineyard that I bring to life and show where you can visit that vineyard, or you can have a virtual wine tasting and all these things, that's different. And so if I leave a legacy of any sort through this slightly bumpy period where I've ended up being the person out there telling the whole story and then trying to persuade everyone else that it's worth listening to and more importantly buying the wine. I know I can do it because I have, but I have found it incredibly difficult and but I don't like to give up, and in all of my career I've always, because I am resilient, and I'm going, okay, that bit didn't work, let me have another go in this area. So yeah, it's I think sporting wine's a fantastic idea. There's so many wines around that just, people say range, they say price, they say sustainability, delivery, education, ethical sources and all the rest. And I go taste, story, quality, and I leave the others for that. So it's kind of, I've only got capacity to deal with the bits that are interesting, but we'll see. It's I've been very grateful to EP over the period who've supported me. Chris Chefs from day one has loved the idea, and it's still a great idea. There's still plenty to do if I'm going to turn it into something material, but as I said, I'm not going to give up. So it's we'll see what happens.
And it sounds like you're still learning after all this time. You're still sort of learning. How do you do that? How do you keep yourself sort of,
I
fresh to ideas
Yeah,
and
I've got boundless energy, but I do kick myself for making crazy, crazy mistakes. I mean, some of it because you can't account for. So when Brexit and the pandemic, one after the other came in, I lost 25% of all my turnover in one go because the place shut down, never reopened. Then I was told that the ship in Buenos Aires harbor wasn't going to be leaving for 8 weeks, and it had all my wine on it, and and we were all learning lessons for you better ship some more because you never know when the next ship's coming. So I ended up shipping huge amounts of wine I couldn't afford into the UK and then couldn't sell it. I'm like, oh, it wasn't my fault because they would say, yeah, we had that problem as well. I said, yeah, the problem is you're a big company, I'm a small company. So you kind of you make mistakes, you learn from some of them you couldn't account for. And then, so I've learned a lot. I still am, and as long as you learn from your mistakes, then you're fine, or at least you're wiser. You may not be fine, but you'd be wiser. So yes, I am still learning, and also because the environment of food and drink is changing hugely right now. I mean, you know that better than I do. I'm still of that view that we have to give people a better experience, and if
yeah,
we do that, just pay a little bit more because I've been both a customer and a provider of service, and the customer notices and they come back and they'll be a better customer next time. It's a cheap economy or a false economy to think that won't happen because if you're the other way, oh, I'll take it or leave it. Well, did you like that food? No, not nor me. Or what was that glass of wine? Forget it, give me a beer. And I think you get that people remember.
yeah,
Whereas if it's the other way around, then they not only appreciate it, but they tell their friend, and then they come
yeah.
back again, and they bring more people in, and you get the virtuous circle, and that's what I'm trying to work on. But
Yeah.
It's
It's
quite got
the service level, isn't it? And the listening, feeling listened to as a customer, I think.
I think, yeah, that's right.
Mm,
And I think, being I've been guilty because it gets busy and you get an email or you get some contact where someone says, that wasn't right, can you fix that? And then you don't respond in time or something, and then it becomes an issue and people get annoyed with it. So, and of course that happens in the business world and in all other worlds, but I've noticed it mostly in a consumer facing industry where and people do care about their wine. They genuinely do.
mm,
It's with love, but puts the pressure on you as well. So, but I met some amazing people through that period in both the wine industry, the food industry, and hospitality in general. And in a world where that matters more and more and more, actually, and particularly in the sporting world, the consumer experience, where the dwell time needs to grow, and take the American football examples, and people go for the whole day, don't they, for NFL experiences,
yeah.
and they don't all eat popcorn. There I mean, you go to Tottenham for an NFL match or whatever. I mean, the culinary experience is off
Yeah.
the chart good, and they've really made a special thing of it. And they're probably I don't want to pick anyone out, but I've been there and had that incredible experience, and they set out to do it that way. So they're probably the litmus paper. And every time you go to Wembley with Delaware, it's an incredible experience. And the people are doing it very well. And that's what I can lock into because from a wine side things, people will want some nice wine alongside that nice food and a lovely day out at the same time. So, and that's alongside, of course, saying to somebody, it's English Wine Week, so why don't you have some English wines? Or
Yeah.
we've won a cricket test match, so why don't you drink some wines that Ian Botham has curated? Or South Africa won the World Cup, so have some of Skullburger's wines, etc. I'm just talking to the winemakers from Swartland, which is north of Cape Town, where the World Player of the Year, World Rugby Player of the Year, it's his dad's vineyard. And it's such a story, and how when as a kid he tramped the grapes and is with three brothers, so he got a wine called 8 Feet.
Yeah.
And it's a lovely wine
We
from
want
the
to hear
region.
stories, don't we? Real stories behind brands, don't we?
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
right. And I think the most of our wines have got some visual connection, at least to the vineyard, if not to the sporting connection at the same time. So those things. People sort of told me to shut up with the story and can I drink the wine now? I said, because it's been such a great story, but
Mm,
they're already wedded to it, So everyone in their specialization, whether it be wine or anything else, knows that if you can get people really enthused, then they're going to be more interested in the product. So
yeah.
that's something that I work on. Just got to get the logistics right. That's all.
So I think we should end the webinar with the title, really, of what the webinar is really. So in terms of international sportsman, corporate banker, entrepreneur in hospitality, which role truly reflects the man behind the title? I mean, what would you say to that? Do you think you wouldn't be where you were today without all three, really? Or do you feel one more than the other?
No, I think that it'd be, I've sort of given the impression that I fell into each one slightly by mistake, but that's just to show that you can't prescribe, and perhaps was exaggerating to make the point. Obviously, I knew I always wanted to play lots of sport when I was a kid. I didn't know I wanted to be an investment banker. That was just a conversation with someone who took a chance on me. I think back to my point that you don't have to have all the skills, but you have to have something in your attitude to life and that someone sees in you, that something they can use, they can mold, they can influence, they can help drive you in a direction. No one's buying the finished article. So, and then of course in the entrepreneur world of what I went into and I'm in with wine, I'm still involved with rugby off field. It's what you can bring through your own force of personality and my history and my learning. So I couldn't be doing the wine thing now had I not had those other two experiences before, because I was relying on my relationships to trust in what I was going to do next, even though they all told me that it was far too complicated for me, and they're probably right. But it's so those two things, those first two things go hand in hand, and I always knew I was going to have to do a job of work. The fact is, sport has continually come in and influenced and affected what I do, even when I was playing and even after I stopped playing. So I think I'm just grateful that I've been able to combine the two. That's definitely intentional. I always want to have some of my life influenced by sport. And so
Mm.
the rest of it probably does slightly come with the opportunity and then you have a go at it. But the sport and work combo thing is what keeps my kind of passion alive, and a glass of wine alongside now,
Sounds
which I
perfect.
end up having to drink most of what I've got in storage, if I can't sell it, then but the personalities, the people you meet, experiences you have, those things are common to all those three.
Great. No, that's a great way to end. Thanks, Simon. Yeah, and thank you for sharing your story so openly with us. It really goes to show that a career isn't just one path. It's, a series of transitions really, all requiring courage and a bit of reinvention along the way. So yes, thank you to those who've joined us. And if you've enjoyed this conversation, we hope you'll join us for future episodes of this extraordinary series. But until next time, take care. And look, thanks again, Simon. It's been a really great conversation.
Thank you for the opportunity, and I look forward to being part of the EP network for years to come. I think it's a great experience, and thank you.
Thank you.